G'day legends, I hope you are having a fantastic day, and so far you are having a fantastic week. Now actually this is new to me because this is the first time I've spoken all day. My voice sounds a lot better, so thank you for all the support and a couple of days in Struggletown. Now legends, of course, as always, we do have a lot to go over. We're going to talk about long-range weapons, long-range strikes. We're going to look at fighter aircraft, these Gripens, the reality actually of that. It seems like half my job is just adding nuance and reality to what is just blatant headline propaganda and saying, well, this is actually what is behind it. We're going to look at, on the maps, is it Pokrovsk? Is it the end of Pokrovsk? We have many reliable mappers talking about major withdrawals at the moment. We'll look at the maps, we'll look at geolocations in all areas that we have today. We're going to look at US sanctions, Trump's first sanctions against Russia, what this means, what effect it may have, and as well as then ancillary states, look at China, India, all of that too, and some comments that Trump has made about this war. Now, we may go over in my final folder about a bit of a bureaucratic restructure in the Russian military and how this can be a byproduct of attritional war needing to increase effectiveness, increase efficiency. So you then have to streamline certain things from even paper to then digitized. We're going to talk about that. If not today, we'll talk about it tomorrow, and how in that, one of the interesting things is we've seen the ground forces improve, and due to attrition, it's forced to improve in many regards, but we haven't seen much improvement, nowhere near the same, in the Air Force. And is this a product because we haven't seen the Air Force hit as hard? Very interesting to look at that, but we're going to walk through the folders in this order right here. So let's start here. The biggest, or some of the biggest news of the day, at least in like the information propaganda sphere, about Sweden, Ukraine, export deal for up to 150 Gripen fighter jets. This, at the end of the day, this was a social media morale photo op, and let alone, you would guess it, there was like 1,000 photographers there to take all these professional photos of this happening. Meanwhile, the boys at the front line, who are actually doing the fighting in what is a ground war, have shortages of everything from water to food to ammo to shells. But everything going perfectly, which it never does in military procurement, the first aircraft would take 3 years from a finalised contract, which this is not a finalised contract. The entire batch, a minimum then of 15 years. So I'm guessing that NATO, they're making shirts about these flying over Moscow like we saw with the F-16, but this will not participate in this war. And if these do participate in this war in 3 years' time, we're in big, big trouble. Let's look at long-range capabilities. Now, the SJW, they released this. US lifts key restriction on Ukraine's use of Western long-range missile. The move coincides with Trump's push to pressure Moscow into talks ending the war and to withhold US Tomahawk missiles from Kyiv. Now, firstly, on the very surface of this, let's not act like this hasn't been the case anyway. Regardless of the origin of the weapons system, if it's a Storm Shadow, it's a whatever going in, US intel is used, and the restrictions that are public versus what we've really seen is a little bit different. The actual amount of ATACMS, I would have if I was a gambling man, I'd say Ukraine probably has no ATACMS to fire at the moment anyway. But then Trump has pushed back on them here, going, the Wall Street Journal story on US approval of Ukraine being allowed to use long-range weapons deep into Russia is fake news. The US has nothing to do with those missiles, wherever they may come from, or what Ukraine does with them, except for targeting, intel, actually the more important systems rather than just the physical system going in and the key components of that weaponry. Now, if we're going to be even here, if we're going to talk about key components of weaponry, and if components of weapons rocking up in a Iran, then therefore we can say all these countries are involved, well, then we can do it the other way. And if a component in a Storm Shadow is from here, again, I don't like that because it's how long of a bow do you want to draw? But you get it. Trump's pushing back saying this is just fabricated, which the media would not do this. But let's look a little bit further at Trump in the White House and what he's said about providing Ukraine with Tomahawk cruise missiles, saying the problem with the Tomahawk is, and a lot of people don't know, it takes a minimum of 6 months, usually a year to learn to use. Now, this is the thing. This is the absolute minimum to learn to use one, let alone all logistics, the ground firing stations, everything. We've gone over this. We think an absolute minimum would be like 18 months before you're seeing them fly. The only way a Tomahawk is going to be shot is if we were to shoot it, being the US. That we're not going to do this. He added there's a tremendous learning curve when it comes to the highly complex weapons, and he signalled he wouldn't want the US military to train other nations on how to effectively fire the very accurate missiles. This is something I've gone over for a number of years now, is I don't get why during wartime that there's so much focus on Ukraine's sovereign capability of like handing these weapons to Ukraine to operate, or handing then F-16s to Ukraine to then try train pilots, and it being so far, when you could look into more of a private contracting to be able to do something like this, especially with more long range. Now, that is absolutely happening. It's just a little bit more grey and not as common as some think, but it's definitely happening on the other end. Anyway, let's have a look at these maps. But what we need to say is the Tomahawk, even if it got approved today, long way off. Even when it came into the fold, is there any weapon bar atomic weapons, nuclear weapons that are Wunderwaffen? No. So here's Ukraine's center screen, the capital of Kyiv, red areas occupied since 22, the purple since 2014. Of course, the red check that you're seeing, that is ground that Russia has made over the past 24 hours. The blue check, the same, but for Ukraine. Now, where we need to go is Pokrovsk. Now, we're going to look at Pokrovsk actual first, and then we'll look, of course, on the northern side where we see both blue and red check. Get a bit more of an idea in here. We do have some geolocations as well. Now, on this map, there's been no movement around Pokrovsk actual, but many of the most reliable mappers are speaking about this. Mr. Playful says, as of currently, information about the clearing of most Russian presence in Pokrovsk city does not correspond to reality. So there's a lot of reporting that no, Russia's being cleared out of here. He's saying that this does not correspond to reality. The situation remains extremely difficult. Remember, that term extremely difficult, if your doctor ever tells you this about a diagnosis, you're fucked. Just like logistics, and the Russian presence is recorded throughout all of the city. Mr. Suryak says, the Ukraine army began an important withdrawal from the northern part of Minograd. Meanwhile, troops are trying to build time in the southern part. So, of course, Minograd, the northern part here, southern part, but this is all part of this like Pokrovsk pocket that we have seen develop over many months. It has been a treading down but squeezing like a vice also. This Ukrainian officer said this, the situation in Pokrovsk-Minograd agglomeration is difficult right now. The pocket is easily targeted by FPV drones, and entering Minograd itself is a very challenging task. It was obvious that the enemy would not storm such a large agglomeration head-on, so they began to gradually bypass it, advancing their success on the flanks. Again, this is what we've seen again and again and again. Now, of course, the cope to this is people go, the Russians are too cowardly to have a front on attack. But then if they did do that, you'd say then they're too stupid to go around and to not go around on the flanks. But this is what we've seen, is building on the flanks, squeezing down, holding, attriting, destroying, moving. Again, click just on my Willie OAM channel. It's the main video, I think, on my account, is how the Russians are using these pockets in the attritional phase of war. So let's actually have a look at some of the maps in here. So this may be a little bit difficult to see. I always find the red on red hard for my eyes, but you can see this is Pokrovsk. This, of course, is Minograd. Now, down in Pokrovsk actual, that Russia is making some ground just around the base of here, that the southern part, according to Suryak and according to the grey zone on Deep State, which I will say, we're not going to confirm it, but the grey zone on Deep State, the correlation to red zone on the other maps is very, very large at times. But then we have a look down on the Minograd side where he spoke about moving on the south, trying to withdraw out of the northern front. We can see where Russia is making more ground on the southeastern side of Munich-Grad. But then to the northern sector up in here, so you'll see then the Rodyanske Krasny Liman area, you can see where this road is heading out, where of course Rodyanske is sitting, how the Russians are moving through here as well. Now what we haven't seen for a long time is Russia physically close up these encirclements. Of course, we did see that somewhere like Mariupol, but we didn't see it in Avdiivka or Velika, that there was a rushed withdrawal out before that time. But what we have seen, but it's harder to get an idea on, is vertical envelopment of areas. And I would say, with what we've spoken about, if it's hard to get in and out of here, that this area has been vertically enveloped for some time, or strategically enveloped, but not physically enveloped. And we've spoken about this makes sense in attritional war. If you have an adversary continuing to push forces on roads of which you have fire control over with drones or artillery or whatever, you will leave them open, because your number one goal at the moment is to force a higher rate of attrition. And that is, from what I'm seeing, what the Russian command, who had massive failures in the beginning, who overestimated and underestimated a lot, but I think are teaching a lesson in attrition and recovery at the moment. Now let's look on the northern sector, where we see some blue in here, where Ukraine has had a offensive and has pushed back in Kushtrev Yar. We see this going up, a Ukrainian flag going up in Kushtrev Yar, shown in the blue on this. So I don't have the exact geolocation of it, but we look at where Thorkill basically shows this anyway. We have this confirmation, of course, by Suryak map push in on Kushtrev Yar, as well as around Vilna as well. Now these, of course, the maps look vastly different. You don't have these massive cutoffs of thousands and thousands of troops. Remember, headlines only a few weeks ago were saying the Russians, there's thousands in here, we're just going to let them either die there or surrender. So I don't know what's exactly happened to those. Then we look on who I believe has been the best mapper on this area is Mr. Thorkill 65. Kushtrev Yar, about this vicinity of where we see that Ukrainian flag go up that I showed you, saying today the Ukrainian side reported the capture of Kushtrev Yar and released a video showing soldiers of the 132nd Separate Recon Battalion raising a flag in the ruins of the village, as well as taking approximately 4 to 6 prisoners from an unknown Russian unit. But you can see that here there was success on the battlefield, but that there's not these large cutoffs which maps like this have been showing for some time. But then down in the base of here, in the direction of Penkivka, that there has been some Russian ground made in the base of this further envelopment. And this area in here, I think people are going to get a rude shock when they look away from just a singular mapping source of how this actually looks in here. And it makes sense that there may be advancements up in this sector, while the main focus for the Russians is down and around to squeeze this pocket at the moment, or work on the eastern side of this pocket. Now, let's have a look for another geolocation. So we have on the western side Udashne, then we have Molodotske in here. Again, I'm learning on the fly how to pronounce these, but we see just in here, sort of just above the D, we have seen a Russian flag go up in that vicinity, very, very close to the Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. So a lot of movement around in here. Now, I believe probably some of the most important movement has been on the Velika Novosilka northern front. Movement, of course, in from the north of Zeleny Hay in towards Ivanivkia area, across some of the waterways that form a physical barrier in here. Now remember, a lot of wars historically have stopped when it meets a physical barrier rather than a drawn line in the sand. But according to Suryak, this is much, much larger. This is on this front. Of course, you can see where Ivanivka is sitting. During the last 6 days, Russian army managed to capture a series of positions adjacent to the forest west of Filia Vovcha River and between Donetsk and Dnipropetrovsk Oblast. In addition, weeks of combats took full control over Ivanivka and part of the northern hills. So Ivanivka, he's saying, has completely come under control, as well down in what is becoming the Novopavlovsk pocket that is now developing. And you can see, pushing on Ivanivka, pushing on this Molodotske, this may form another then very infamous pocket that Sursky's forces will find themselves in. Let's then look for Novopavlovsk to the western side. Uspanivka, of course, a large amount of grey zone has always been served up in here to the south of Veshneve as well. Of course, the grey zone in here, this area has been in free fall. Many are ignoring it, but if we were to step back on the maps, let's go back to the 1st to the 22nd, relative to what we've seen, this area is moving very quickly. So we see this movement in here, but I believe this is likely further on again. We have Pavlivka. This is Pavlivka just in here. I've lined these arrows up as close as I possibly can. We had 2 Russian flags going up. This is one of them that was geolocated right there. So a fair way behind where the line is shown on this map. Let's zoom out. Let's move up the maps. That's the only mapping updates we have on the deep state. But then we come down into the Terney front, Stavk area, where we know a lot of grey zone in this area. Let's see. No more grey zone shown today. But then we show Suryak maps. He's showing that this is further ballooning and expanding out just to the west of Stavk. This is Stavk just in here to the west, but also ballooning out on the Dobrasheve front line, we believe, as well. Captured Russian forces restart advances in Serezhne, our first time since September. So Serezhne, Dobrasheve area out in here. We've spoken at length about how this front could actually move very, very slow, but then could move very quick. What we don't know is we don't know where that moving quick time is. Is there going to be a continuation of fighting through winter? I believe so. Will we start seeing further movements? Maybe. Again, we never, ever know. Now, Trump was due to meet with Putin in Hungary. Again, this has been very opaque of what was actually going on because we had separate reporting, we had cancellations, we heard it was still on, we have the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Hungary saying this, that, but the whole rest of it. Europe is in chaos, in my opinion. Europe, I know I'm highly critical, but I think Europe is in managed decline at best. And we're going to see further fracturing. This war has been a catalyst of, but people will turn around and blame Putin for this and forget about all these issues around, even from immigration to manufacturing to everything over the past multiple decades. And we see, of course, with the tensions as well between maybe Poland and Hungary, that this will, I'm not saying it's going to bubble over into war, but the underpinnings, the foundations of things like the EU, this is being just absolutely eroded away, as well as the trust in these financial systems, which we're going to go over today. So this is then Big Don with Big Ruta in the White House right here.
But that'll be a big one. We canceled the meeting with President Putin.
So we canceled the meeting?
It didn't feel right to me. It didn't feel like we were going to get to the place we have to get, so I canceled it. But we'll do it in the future.
We'll do it in the future. It didn't feel like we were going to get there. Why? Why is Trump so pissed off with Putin? Because Putin, he has said, I want my original demands. He's not shifting on that at all. But let's, on the other hand, let's not say like Zelensky's changing demands either. Zelensky's demands are still 1991 border, NATO entry, no limits on military size, entry into institutions, all of that too. Now, what I will say is Putin's demands are much closer than Zelensky's are, because if you trust even the linear warfare bros, that even if you say it's going to be 50 years, 100 years until that demand is reached, well, how long is it going to be until Ukraine's demand is reached? Okay? Let's go a little bit further on what some comments that Trump has made.
Hopefully he'll become reasonable, and hopefully
he being Putin will become reasonable.
Zelensky will be reasonable too. You know, it takes two to tango, as they say, and we're going to find out. They hate each other. So they hate each other. They're both not being reasonable for some sort of ceasefire talks. And this is the thing, I think, this is why this is falling apart, is the West, US in that, and Europe, they are pushing ceasefire. Ceasefire only benefits Ukraine. That's the reason they're pushing a ceasefire, is so they can flood in arms, give a break, fix the power stations. Putin is pushing for negotiated end of the war that will then ratify the battlefield at the moment. That's why the West don't want that.
But as long as that ceasefire word is in it, I think we're going to have no luck. Now, Trump has truth.com to this. Treasury sanctions, major Russian oil companies, calls on Moscow to immediately agree to ceasefire. And we're going to go over what's in this. But Trump is just frustrated because Putin has not budged an inch on his demands. But I think behind closed doors, Trump would be very frustrated with Zelensky as well. These sanctions, like the rest, my initial take is it's too little, too late. It's been years. And not only the 3.5 years, almost 4 years of the war so far, but there's been a decade of war before this point now. And Russia, they have been adapting to sanctions and moving their resources into other markets. And these other markets are so large now, being China or India, even if we were to fully turn back on the taps for Russia, we wouldn't replace it, nor could we entice it back if we needed to. Now, these same markets, they have shifted from then, meaning these European markets particularly, and the US market, that is underpinned by the USD and the euro and the trust in this. These markets, through tariffs, through sanctions, through weaponization of itself, they have moved and they've decreased their credibility as they've shifted from a rules-based economic bloc to politicized financial actors. And in the future, I think this is going to come back to bite you on the arse massively. All that I see sanctions doing now is reducing trust and credibility in the dollar, the euro, if you even want to talk about the sterling, the pound. The UK is just grasping onto its once power. To call it a middling power at this point, sorry, but it's gone. But the reduction in trust and credibility, the shift from these being then a rules-based economic bloc, it's just politicized, sanctioned, weaponization of this. This is the reason we're seeing gold and things like crypto becoming more valuable, as well as many nations, nations like China and surrounding, looking to de-dollarize so that these can't just be straight put on them. If you're willing to do it to Russia, you will absolutely do it to us. And the final nail in the coffin here, I'm going to do a special on this, is if Europe does cave to the pressure of using the frozen Russian sovereign assets, 200 to 300 billion euros, something in that, that's going to be a nail in the coffin for the trust, the credibility. For a short-term victory, it's going to be a nail in the coffin for countries moving money away from that and moving into assets like gold. And one of the big parts in the research for that I'm doing at the back end is, let's call it 300 billion euros. That's still, even if all of it is taken, is spent, it's still not even half of the estimated rebuild cost for Ukraine, while these nations are in a managed decline. Now, I will be speaking with Dr. Connolly next week, Doctor of Economics, who's on this channel all the time, and he'll give us a reality of these exact moves. He can talk about gold, talk about these sanctions. Now, what Putin will do is he will just play into Trump's impatience in wanting to settle wars. It's exactly what he will do. Why? Because the US has significantly less leverage on Russia than it does Ukraine. Trump's impatience grows and grows and grows. He actually does have the leverage to force Zelensky to make decisions. He may have some leverage to try and push Russia's hand, but he doesn't have the leverage to just say, you'll just have no more imaging or no more targeting, no more intel. He has so much more leverage on Zelensky than he does Putin. And this is why Putin, I think, will just play, even if it's in decline as well, will just play into that impatience. Now, let's just quickly look over some of this. Treasury sanctions major Russian oil companies, calls on Moscow to immediately agree to a ceasefire, further as a result of Russia's lack of serious commitment. Until peace process, today's actions increase pressure on the energy sector, degrade Kremlin's ability to raise revenue. The United States will continue to advocate for peaceful resolution, and a permanent peace demands entirely on Russia's willingness to negotiate in good faith. So saying it's all on Russia to do this. The time to stop killing, immediate ceasefire from Secretary of Treasury Scott Bessent. As given Putin's refusal to end this senseless war, Treasury is sanctioning Russia's two largest oil companies, of course, Rosneft and Lukoil. Now, these have had, or at least Lukoil, I think I looked at, had a reduction of about 3 to 4% on some of the markets. That isn't a collapse, as I would call it. What I'll say, Mr. Percent, he's this same fucking mouth breather that we have seen on every channel imaginable, calling this like Modi's war, while completely ignoring other actors spending billions in Russia, including the US itself, all the European states as well. Some of the claims he has made, especially towards India, have been fucking crazy. Now, this sanction implication from OFAC, the Office of Foreign Assets Control, that as a result of today's action, all property interests in property of the designated or blocked persons described that are above in the US or possession or control of the US persons are blocked and must be reported to Foreign Assets Control Office. In addition, any entities that are owned directly, indirectly, individually, or the aggregate 50% or more by one or more persons will also be blocked. Again, this is actually going to have a huge effect on a lot of American companies as well. You can see this is just one page, but there's multiple pages of who is being sanctioned here. Now, this is very interesting here, and this is something we've heard Trump do before. What did I call it? Appealing to authority? Something like that, where Trump says shit that may not have happened from an authoritative figure to give it credibility. So, for instance, if I remember correctly, he said, Putin behind closed doors said to me that the 2021 election, whenever it was stolen from me. Now, we don't know if Putin said that or not. That would be like if I had a meeting with a figure who had authority. I have a meeting with whoever, Xi, and I come out to report and I go, yeah, Xi said I've got the biggest dong that he's ever seen. I think there's a lot of that sort of making shit up, tying it to a figure with authority. We see BBC. Talk about this here. Trump repeats claim India will cut Russian oil imports. Now, in the first article from the BBC, Trump said Indian Narendra Modi had assured him during a phone call on Tuesday that New Delhi was not going to buy much oil from Russia, as he too wants to see the end of war with Russia-Ukraine. In the second article, only a few hours later, India's foreign ministry says it's not aware of the phone call in which Donald Trump claimed Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi agreed to stop buying Russian oil. India does have a nationalist government, and they are not, in my opinion, looking at bending the knee to America, especially when there's no replacement at cost for that either, as India is trying to develop very quickly. As well, China sinking oil prices, they're just getting a better bargain on that. It's a real push and pull game. Now, we're going to skip the next part and I'll present it to you tomorrow. But quickly, Russia's defense ministry launches major bureaucracy overhaul. We're going to talk about war acts as a brutal Darwinian filter on inefficiency. Sadly, it hasn't worked as a Darwinian filter on then bloggers and people pushing information online. So we're going to go over that and some of the changes that we have seen, what we may see, at least in theory, and some of the problems that we have as well that are just better hidden. Legends, look after yourselves, and I'll speak to you tomorrow. Thank you. Bye-bye.